I had always thought of myself as a simple person. I worked hard, paid my bills, and kept to myself. I wasn't interested in neighborhood drama. I just wanted to live in peace. That's why I chose this community, a quiet, well-kept neighborhood where people minded their own business and things stayed predictable. Welcome to Karen Chronicles. Before we begin, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can continue creating even better content. Thank you so much. All right, let's get started. But then there was Karen, and Karen didn't believe in minding her own business. The self-appointed queen of HOA. Every neighborhood has one. That one person who thinks they run the entire community. That one person who somehow knows every rule, every bylaw, every technicality, and twists them to control everyone else. Here, that person was Karen. She wasn't just a member of the HOA, Homeowners Association. She was the HOA, or at least that's how she acted. With her clipboard in one hand and a sense of self-importance in the other, she made it her personal mission to enforce every rule in the book. And if the rule wasn't clear, well, Karen would interpret it however she saw fit. Lawn a little too long? Expect a violation notice. Holiday lights up one day past the deadline? HOA fine. Trash bin left out an hour late? Prepare for a lecture. But I had never personally had an issue with Karen. That is, until the day I decided to wash my car. Of a ward, it was a normal Saturday morning. The sun was shining, the air was crisp, and I figured, why not wash my car? I pulled out my hose, grabbed a bucket of soapy water, and got to work. Nothing special, just a guy washing his car in his own driveway. Then out of nowhere, "Excuse me," I turned. And there she was, Karen. Arms crossed, eyebrows raised, eyes scanning the scene like a detective uncovering a crime. "What do you think you're doing?" I blinked. "Washing my car?" Wrong answer. Karen let out a dramatic sigh, shaking her head as if I had just confessed to some terrible offense. "You can't do that here." I stared at her. Was she serious? I can't wash my own car? "It's against HOA policy," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. I frowned. "I don't remember reading that anywhere." Karen smirked. "Oh, it's there. You just didn't read carefully enough." Something about the way she said it made my blood boil. I had lived here for years. I had read the HOA rules, and nowhere, absolutely nowhere, did it say that I couldn't wash my car. Show me where it says that. Karen faltered for half a second. "It falls under water usage regulations," she said, her tone sharp, "and community cleanliness policies. Water runoff can be a hazard." Hazard? It's just soap and water. But Karen wasn't interested in logic. "You need to stop. Now." And that's when I knew this wasn't about rules. This was about Karen and her power trip. And if she thought I was just going to roll over and obey, she had no idea who she was dealing with. It had started as a peaceful afternoon, just me, a bucket of soapy water, and my car. The sun was warm, the sky was clear, and for once, everything felt simple. I wasn't bothering anyone, just washing my own car in my own driveway. Then came the storm. "Excuse me." I barely had time to turn around before Karen came marching up the sidewalk, her face flushed red with outrage. "What do you think you're doing?" The wrath of Karen. Washing my car? Karen's arms flailed, her eyes wide as if I had just committed a felony. "You can't do that here." I raised an eyebrow, glancing down at the hose in my hand. "Pretty sure I can." That was the moment she lost it. "It's against HOA rules." She practically shouted it, her voice sharp enough to make passing birds reconsider their flight path. "You cannot use your driveway for personal cleaning. That is a violation of community policy." "That's not a thing." "Yes, it is," she snapped. "It affects the aesthetic of the neighborhood." Ah, there it was. The neighborhood aesthetic, Karen's favorite excuse to control everything. Karen's ridiculous reasons. "You're making the street look bad. It's a driveway, Karen. not an art exhibit. It's not just your driveway, it's part of the community's image. Now she was just making things up. HOA doesn't own my driveway, Karen. It doesn't matter. This is a respectable neighborhood. She pointed dramatically at my half-washed car as if it was an affront to the entire zip code. What's next? People fixing their own fences, painting their mailboxes whatever color they want? God forbid, I muttered. Karen ignored me, already on to her next ridiculous argument. You're using community water. It's my water. From my house. That's not the point. Of course it wasn't. The breaking point. Karen, I sighed, wiping the soap suds off my hands. Show me the rule. That stopped her for half a second. It falls under general maintenance and neighborhood cleanliness. That's not a rule, Karen. That's something you just made up. Silence. A flicker of hesitation in her eyes. And then pure unfiltered rage. You will be reported to the HOA, she shrieked. I'll make sure you get fined for this. She stormed off, already dialing her phone, and just like that, washing my car had turned into an all-out war. The moment Karen stormed off, I knew she wasn't done. But calling the cops, even for her, that seemed extreme. Yet, just minutes later, the telltale flicker of red and blue lights danced against the houses, and the low hum of an approaching police cruiser sent a chill down my spine. No way, I muttered, dropping my sponge. Karen actually called the police for washing my car. When the police arrive, the cruiser slowed to a stop in front of my house. A uniformed officer stepped out, adjusting his belt, looking, well, confused. I wasn't alone in my disbelief. Several neighbors had stepped outside, whispering amongst themselves, intrigued by the sudden police presence in our quiet neighborhood. Of course, wasted no time. She practically sprinted toward the officer, and her clipboard clutched tightly in one hand as if it were a legal document. Officer, thank goodness you're here, she started, already breathless from her own outrage. This man is violating our community's regulations and causing a disturbance. The officer raised an eyebrow. What exactly is the issue, ma'am? Karen huffed. She jabbed a finger toward me, is washing his car in the driveway. The officer blinked. He turned to look at me, then at my half-washed car, then back at Karen. And Karen scoffed, as if this was the most obvious crime in history. It's against HOA policy. The officer sighed. Ma'am, HOA rules are not enforceable by law. We're here for criminal violations, not neighborhood disputes. Karen versus reality. But it's a violation, Karen insisted, her voice rising. Ma'am, unless he's breaking a city ordinance or trespassing, this is not a police matter. I bit back a smirk. Karen's face turned an even deeper shade of red, but she wasn't about to give up. There's water runoff. That's an environmental hazard. The officer glanced at my driveway, where a small stream of soapy water trickled toward the curb. He exhaled. That's not a crime. Karen's jaw clenched. So you're telling me there's nothing you can do? Not unless you'd like to file a false report, ma'am. That shut her up. The officer turned to me, barely able to hide his exasperation. Sir, sorry about this. You're free to continue washing your car. Karen let out a noise that was somewhere between a gasp and a growl. You'll be hearing from the HOA, she spat before marching back toward her house. The officer just shook his head and left. The battle becomes a war. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong, because Karen, she wasn't the type to take no for an answer. She wanted control, she wanted to win. And if the police wouldn't do her bidding, she would find another way. The neighborhood divide. The very next day, things took a turn. Wasn't just mad, she was on a mission. She started going door to door, knocking, whispering, spreading whatever twisted version of the story she had concocted. He doesn't respect the rules. If we let him get away with this, what's neighborhood? What kind of neighborhood do we want to live in? And just like that, the war was no longer between me and Karen. It had become a fight for the entire neighborhood. Some neighbors rolled their eyes, some ignored her, but some, they listened. Karen was building an army, and I had no idea just how bad things were about to get. If Karen thought she could scare me into submission, she had severely underestimated me. This wasn't just about washing my car anymore. This was about standing up against abuse of power. And if Karen wanted a fight, I was ready to bring one. Step 1. Knowing my rights. The first thing I did was dig into the HOA regulations. If Karen was so confident that I was violating the rules, then surely it had to be written somewhere. I spent hours reviewing every bylaw, every property guideline, every obscure clause in the HOA handbook. And what did I find? Nothing. No rule banning car washing, no mention of water runoff, no restrictions on using my own driveway. Karen had made it up. That's when I realized I wasn't the one in trouble. Karen was. Step 2. Gathering evidence. I wasn't about to fight this battle empty-handed. If Karen wanted to escalate things, I needed to be prepared. So, I started keeping records. I wrote down every interaction, the dates, times, and exact words Karen had said. I reviewed footage from my security camera, which captured her yelling at me, calling the cops, and the officer telling her she had no case. I noted which neighbors she had spoken to, tracking how she was trying to rally people against me. If Karen tried anything else, I would have receipts. Step 3. Finding allies. Karen had been running the HOA like a dictatorship for years, but I wasn't the only one fed up with her. The more I talked to my neighbors, the more I realized people had been quietly suffering under her rule. She fined me for having a basketball hoop in my driveway, one neighbor groaned. She made me repaint my mailbox because the color was too bright, another complained. She's been harassing people for years. Someone needs to stop her. And that's when I met Alex. Alex had lived in the neighborhood longer than me. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was someone who knew how HOA boards worked. Karen has power because no one challenges her, he explained. The second someone pushes back with facts, she loses control. So what do? I asked. He smirked. We make her own rules work against her. The turning point, fighting back. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was going on the offensive. With Alex's help, I drafted a formal complaint against Karen, citing her misuse of HOA power, sent a request for the HOA to clarify its regulations, forcing them to admit that no rule existed against washing cars. Prepared to call for an HOA meeting where I would present my case in front of every homeowner in the neighborhood. Karen had thrived in the shadows, using fear, misinformation, and intimidation to get her way. But now, I was bringing everything into the light. Karen thought she could push me around. She had no idea what was coming for her. Karen wasn't backing down, she was doubling down. If she couldn't use the existing HOA rules to control me, she would simply create new ones. And if facts weren't on her side, she would rely on something more dangerous. Lies. Karen had been a force in the HOA for years. She wasn't just a member, she had connections, influence, and a loyal inner circle of like-minded rule enforcers. And now, she was trying to convince them to pass a brand new rule, a neighborhood-wide ban on washing cars in driveways. Her reasoning? We must protect the aesthetic integrity of our community. Water runoff is an environmental hazard. If we don't control this, next thing you know, people will be fixing cars, running businesses, and turning this neighborhood into chaos. Most HOA board members hesitated. They weren't thrilled about Karen's crusade against a guy washing his car, but she was relentless. She pressured, she manipulated, she made it seem like this was a matter of preserving the community's values. And the worst part? Some people actually believed her. Karen knew that rules alone wouldn't be enough. She needed the court of public opinion on her side, so she spread rumors. She started telling neighbors that I was a troublemaker, someone who disrespected the community and thought he was above the rules. He's aggressive. He's looking for a fight. If we let him get away with this, what's next? And unfortunately, some people believed her. The whispers spread. Neighbors who once greeted me with a wave started avoiding eye contact. A couple of them even crossed the street rather than walk past my house. Karen was winning in the worst way by isolating me, but what she didn't realize was that her web of lies was about to catch the wrong kind of attention. An unexpected twist. The media steps in. It started with a phone call. A local journalist, Racial Porter, had caught wind of what was happening in our neighborhood. We've received reports about an HOA overstepping its boundaries. Would you be open to an interview? I hesitated. Taking this to the media was a whole new level. It wasn't just about proving a point anymore. It was about exposing Karen and the HOA's abuse of power for everyone to see. Was I ready for that? Was Karen? One thing was certain. This fight wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every homeowner who had ever been bullied by their HOA. Karen wanted a war. She was about to get one. The HOA meeting room was packed. Residents filled every chair, murmuring among themselves. Some were curious, some were frustrated, and some, especially Karen's loyal followers, sat with their arms crossed, ready for a fight. At the front of the room, Karen stood tall, exuding her usual air of self-importance. She thought this was just another meeting where she would dictate the rules. But tonight was different. Tonight, I was ready. I was ready. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and placed a folder on the table, calm, steady, prepared. I'd like to address the recent claims that I violated HOA policies by washing my car in my own driveway. Karen rolled her eyes. You did violate the rules. That's why we're discussing this. I opened the folder and pulled out my first piece of evidence. Actually, let's start with property lines. I unfolded a printed map of the neighborhood pointing to my property. This is my house. This is my driveway. And according to official records, this driveway is completely private property. Karen's smile faltered slightly. That's irrelevant, she snapped. HOA rules still apply. I pulled out the next document, the HOA guidelines. Actually, that brings me to my next point. I flipped through the handbook, holding it up for everyone to see. Can you point out where in this document it says washing your car is prohibited? Karen shifted uncomfortably. It falls under community cleanliness policies and water usage guidelines. I turned a page. I've read those sections. Nowhere does it ban car washing. Karen's face turned red. Well, it's implied. That's not how rules work, Karen. The video evidence. The room was buzzing now, whispers, side conversations. Some of Karen's supporters looked unsure. It was time for the final blow. Lastly, I'd like to present some footage from my home security camera. I held up my phone, showing the HOA board and residents the recorded interactions with Karen. In the video, Karen could be seen storming onto my property, yelling about an imaginary rule, calling the police over a non-existent violation, harassing me in my own driveway. The reaction in the room was immediate. Wait, she actually called the cops over a car wash? Is she serious? This is ridiculous. Even some of the HOA board members, Karen's usual allies, looked uncomfortable. And then the questions started. Karen, are you abusing your position in the HOA? Why did you escalate this situation instead of handling it reasonably? Can you prove that washing a car harms the neighborhood in any way? Karen loses control. Karen was cornered. For the first, she wasn't in control of the room. This is a personal attack, she huffed. This man is causing trouble, disrespecting the community. A neighbor in the back spoke up. Actually, Karen, it looks like you're the one causing trouble. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Karen's face twisted in frustration. You people don't understand. If we don't enforce rules, this neighborhood will turn into chaos. Rules? I asked, crossing my arms. Or just the ones you make up to control people? Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. Because she knew she had lost. The turning point. The HOA board went silent, exchanging glances. Helped. Finally, one of them cleared his throat. We will need to review this situation further. But for now, there's no evidence of wrongdoing. This case is dismissed. And just like that, it was over. Karen had tried to turn the entire community against me, but instead she had exposed herself. And this was just the beginning of the end for her reign over the HOA. The fallout from the HOA meeting was swift and undeniable. Karen had lost her power, her credibility, her iron grip on the neighborhood. All of it was slipping through her fingers. She had spent years controlling homeowners with fear and manipulation, but now, the community. Karen's public defeat. The HOA had no choice but to dismiss her proposed rule change. Without any legal basis, they couldn't justify banning car washing or giving Karen the unchecked authority she had always craved. For the first time, she was forced to back down. And worse, her own reputation had taken a massive hit. The neighbors who had once blindly followed her were now questioning everything. She really called the cops over a car wash? How many other rules has she made up over the years? Maybe it's time for a new HOA president. Karen's reign was crumbling. Some residents even suggested removing her from the HOA board entirely, arguing that she had abused her power, created division instead of unity, wasted HOA resources on personal vendettas. Karen had spent years making other people feel powerless. Now she was the one losing control, restoring balance and peace. As for me, for the first time in months, I could breathe easy. No more violation notices. No more surprise HOA complaints. No more Karen knocking on my door like a self-appointed law enforcement officer. I had fought back and won. And even more importantly, the neighborhood had changed. People started speaking up. They started questioning the HOA's actions. They started demanding transparency. Karen had relied on people's silence to maintain power. But now, that silence was broken. Lessons learned. Karen's downfall wasn't just about one car wash or one unfair rule. It was about standing up to unchecked authority. Lesson number 1. The truth and evidence are stronger than intimidation. Karen thrived on fear and misinformation, but in the end, she couldn't argue with facts. Lesson number 2. HOA rules aren't absolute. Homeowners have rights. Too many people assume they have to obey without question, but HOA power isn't unlimited and residents can fight back. Lesson number 3. One person can make a difference. She was untouchable, but one resident, armed with the right knowledge and determination, changed everything. And that was the real victory. Not just for me, but for everyone in the neighborhood. Because now they knew. HOA doesn't rule us. We, the residents, have the power to protect our rights. And Karen, she had learned that the hard way. The story of challenging HOA overreach isn't just about one homeowner fighting back. It's about the power of knowledge, resilience, and community unity. Many people, especially older adults, have lived through situations where authority figures abuse their power, expecting compliance simply because they made the rules. But just because someone is in a position of power doesn't mean they are always right, or that their authority is absolute. One knowledge is the greatest weapon against unfair rules. HOAs, corporations, and even government agencies rely on the fact that most people won't take the time to read the fine print. They count on compliance through ignorance. But the moment you educate yourself, whether it's reading property laws, understanding local regulations, knowing your contractual rights, you take away their power to manipulate you. 2, fear keeps bad systems alive, but courage can break them. Maintained control for years because people were too afraid to challenge her. Fear of fines, fear of confrontation, fear of being an outcast in the neighborhood. But once one person stood up and fought back, others realized they didn't have to live under unjust rules. It only takes one voice to inspire many. 3. Being silent allows abuse to continue. If something is unfair or wrong, ignoring it doesn't make it go away. It only allows those in power to keep doing it to others. Speaking up isn't just about protecting yourself, it's about making sure no one else has to go through the same injustice. 4. Change happens when people hold leadership accountable. Whether it's in an HOA, a workplace, or even in politics, leaders must answer to the people they serve. When leadership forgets that, it's up to the people to remind them. If they refuse to listen, they can and should be replaced. Action 5. 5. Community is stronger than any one person in power. Karen thought she could rule alone, but in the end, the community united against her. This is true in any aspect of life. When people come together, they can overcome even the most deeply rooted problems. The key takeaway: never let anyone convince you that you don't have a voice. You do. And when used wisely, it can change everything.